Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Darren. Hey, Ed. Hi, Sam. Hi,
Greetings.
Inga. It's a party.
It is indeed.
Just waiting for Jeff. Catherine said she's gonna be late. We'll log on around 4 o'clock.
I need to grab one thing. I'll be right back. Got to get my notebook to keep track of what's going on. I'm up to 80 pages.
All right.
It's better than my notes.
We can auction off your notebook at the open house to fund the SMMP.
All right, so everyone's here. Who is going to be here until 4? Let me share my screen.
Could I just do ask for an agenda check here? I have no. I'm totally comfortable with what you put out as the agenda, Inga. But I wanted to just mention that I did go to DEQ last Wednesday, and I did find some things. I spent some time over the weekend to look at it more, and maybe we should talk about those at the end of this agenda, just to give you an update.
Yeah, we can if we have time. Given how this has gone so far, we don't usually have any extra time. But we do only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 recommendations to get through that we didn't get through last time. And then we have to go back to the ones the old ones. But I have already let my partner know that I'd probably be an hour late. So if y'all want to stay on later, that's fine with me. Though Sam can't, right? You have your other meeting.
Yeah, I have a 5, but
Yeah, and I've got an appointment at 6, so we'll just have to talk fast.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're starting with recommendation 9. That one doesn't go to this. So, Jeff, you didn't make it.
Nope, I'm
okay
fine
with the wording. All right. And
Wait, so I'm just curious, did we finish on recommendation 8?
we did.
And we all agreed to cut out that last sentence?
No, this is why I said we were going to start on recommendation 9. Is where we left off last time. And then
okay. All right, great.
Jeff
Thank
went
you.
back
Sorry.
and
Yep.
made some, he went and made some new recommendations and revisions to ones we had already agreed on. So we're going to ignore those for the moment.
I apologize for doing that. I know it's kind of out of process, but I went over the whole thing with Holly, who is my boss. And so we put those additional comments in as a result of that conversation.
Sure. All right.
Apologize for making us tread that ground.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. So since Mark and Ed, you guys wrote this, then we will just accept since no one has any changes. All right, so there were, Jeff, you made some changes to 10.
Right.
And I haven't had a chance to read these yet, so I'm reading them as we're going through them.
Yeah, I had a problem understanding what the census drafted was getting to. So I suggested the new sentence, excuse me, as a replacement.
Yeah, I'm generally okay with it, but let me see if it works.
You want me to accept it to get rid of the underline straight through?
No,
Not
not
yet.
yet.
What my perspective is I'm not worried about DEQ in Republic working. I'm worried about the county getting the conditions of approval reflected in the agreements between the county, between DEQ and Republic, where appropriate. And I'm not sure this gets it there. And county conditions for approval. Yeah, it's not a question of them conflicting because they're different. They're not. It's not an issue. So that's kind of like going in the wrong direction. It's
Well, I'm not sure that our requirements can be reflected in a DEQ permit.
okay. Yeah, and that's the problem. It says find a way to do that is, and I keep coming back to the example of there are conditions on how the land is supposed to look once the area is closed, and those don't show up in any of the DEQ requirements or any of the documents. Actually, the opposite shows up. It's ignored. And there's already been closure. Can somebody else see what I'm trying to get to here? Is how do you get the
Well, DEQ does not enforce the county's land use requirements. The county does. So DEQ couldn't take any county conditions into consideration as part of its approval of the final closure plan. And the county's conditions may well conflict with DEQ's jurisdiction over that. So that I think is, if the public members of the committee want to make that recommendation, you can certainly outvote me on that, but I think that we would then be required to vote no on this one, or whatever no is under the Sam and Karate voting requirements. But I can agree that we should be collaborating about that, and that to the degree that the county wants to impose conditions in that area and can impose conditions in that area, that its
Yeah.
conditions are appropriate and enforceable. So I agree with that part.
Well, let me back up. Where the revisions you have here relating to the environment, that wasn't really the thrust.
Well, if you want to, we could just say ensure any county conditions of approval don't conflict with DEQ's regulations or jurisdiction and be enforced by appropriate conditions. I'd be fine with that.
Well, no, it's collaborate to ensure that the county conditions of approval are reflected in Republic's plans and DEQ's approvals or DEQ. I'm not quite getting there yet.
Let
I
me
think
try
we went through.
this.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ed.
I think we
No.
gotta, start with it with Ginny when she said there's some things that are the counties, there's some things that the that are yeah, no, that was the second line. I think that's in there. We're recognizing that there's that it's not always clear, and we're trying to come up with a way that we collaborate to ensure that we know where the lines are on any specific topic. Sam, you were about to come up with
Well,
something.
Mark has had his hand up longer than me, so go for it, Mark, and then I have a potential framing question.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Yeah, so I think there are a couple of different things here. I don't think that, certainly I don't have any objection to agreeing that county's conditions of approval should not conflict with DEQ's regulations. So that's fine, exactly how it's worded, I don't know. But the middle of the paragraph that talks about ensuring the county's land use requirements related to health, safety, and environment, that's a key concept, that those should be reflected in documents. Now, to Jeff's point about, well, DEQ is not going to put those in their permits, that's probably true. There might be some areas where the county's requirements related to safety and environment might be the same as DEQ, what DEQ might be requiring. But I wonder if we just put in the parenthetical section as appropriate. So we could say collaborating with have the whole sentence there, are reflected in documents, for example, DEQ permits, conditions of approval as appropriate, so that I don't think it was the intention of the subcommittee to insist that everything that the county has in their conditions of approval end up in the DEQ permits.
That's correct.
Maybe that helps. I don't know, but I think that concept of health, safety, and environment, because the county does have a bunch of stuff that they say about things like health, safety, environment. And we think they ought to be reflected in, if not in the DEQ permit, then maybe they're reflected in the conditions of approval. But that's my offer there, to see if there's a path forward there.
I'm not sure the last one is needed, because we've just said that there's a line between them, between the county requirements and the between DEQ and CUP. We're just trying to respect that line and have people talk across the line, so nothing falls through the cracks.
So Jeff, this last line, now that the line above it has been changed, Is that acceptable without the additional paragraph, additional sentence, collaborating to ensure?
I continue to think that they won't add any county conditions to their permit approval. So, you know, as appropriate, I think would be fine, but I think we're sort of
Yeah, I see where
misleading.
you are, Jeff, you know. Maybe you take out reflected in DEQ documents, but reflected in enforceable
be
agreements among the parties as appropriate.
Well, there isn't any, there aren't any contracts as part of that either.
So I think there's a key, I think that Inga got a little trigger happy there by deleting conditions of approval. Because I do think that part of the message here was that the counties, and maybe we need to take out land use, but the county's requirements related to health, safety, and environment are reflected in, again, either DEQ documents as appropriate or conditions of approval. So that, I think the conditions of approval piece there was important in our discussions.
Yeah, and I think where I was trying to get at too is when I look at the DEQ documents and the requirements those place on Republic for a permit, I don't see how the county's interests are reflected at all. My problem is the county doesn't even know that they're being ignored.
So a couple of things here. There is so much in those 7 lines there that are nuanced. Let me try to deconstruct it the best I can. First, for reference, there is a legal finding / recommendation on this so-called intersecting roles concept that may provide some verbiage to help with that. The last sentence, collaboration, any county condition of approval do not conflict with DEQ regulations or jurisdictions. You're collaborating, who's collaborating with whom? And why would the county need to collaborate with DEQ on whether or not a county condition can be enforced appropriately? I mean, it's because what's buried in that is, you know, relating to do not conflict with. Well, that's a term of art here, and the lay reader is going to see that additional requirements do not necessarily conflict with unless DEQ has preempted the entire topic. And that nuance is totally missing from this. Finally, if the goal here by the public members is to basically say the county should tell DEQ what the county is doing in this environmental arena and vice versa, then I think that's a simple, and keep each other up to date on any enforcement mechanisms related to that. That might be a simpler statement to make.
Mhm.
Mark.
Yeah, that might be a simpler statement to make, but I think the example that Ed gave previously, and I think where this is the genesis of this is the reclamation plan that was envisioned in either 74 or 83 or whenever about what the
In both.
landfill, yeah, what the landfill was going to look like once all landfilling was done. That was a county requirement that related to the visual aspects of the landfill once it's closed. And in discussions, it's become clear that Republic's position is that the only thing they have to do is what's required under the closure and post-closure legal requirements from DEQ. And those, in fact, are in conflict. That, well, they're trying to achieve different goals. So the DEQ closure and post-closure requirements say you got to do these certain things, and that has to do with protection and water quality and all those sorts of things. But the counties and actually the applicant's proposal for reclamation in 74 and 83 was about the visual appearance. So having said that, I don't know exactly how we get at it here, but that's what we were trying to address.
So I get that. I think what the issue is here is one of preemption. Can the county impose something under the umbrella of reclamation that is different than or more than the requirements of DEQ? That's the first question. If it in fact can, then you are basically saying the fact that Republic complies with DEQ does not mean it may be reclaimed appropriately from DEQ's perspective, but there's still a pending condition of approval there that says you got to put trees in visual screening.
Yes.
And so I don't remember the legal subcommittee's report, but Jeff, do you recall the discussion about can the county say you got to do all DEQ stuff, all reclamation stuff, but by the way, we want you to put in screening around the site and put cow pastures, around the site and grade it a different degree and what have you. Could the county do that? Or are you claiming anything involving reclamation is the exclusive jurisdiction of DEQ?
Well, my problem with it is it depends. I mean, certain things like regrading the site, that would probably directly conflict with DEQ's reclamation plans. Things like requiring screening, that probably would not. But it's going to depend on, what the condition is and how it interacts with the required
Yep.
closure and post-closure requirements. And the other thing that gives us heartburn is in 30 years, when that site is fully closed, the reclamation requirements could be a lot different. I mean, they are a lot different now than they were in 1974 and 1983. So I was trying to get to a spot where that uncertainty is recognized with the understanding that I'm sure that, well, I'm not going to represent that, but I believe that when that would happen, that the county would be involved in that process somehow. But that's 20.
Yeah, and there's no mechanism now.
Right.
We're just trying to get to a mechanism.
So is it to say that, and these are bullet points, not actual language. One, the county should communicate all its conditions or permit conditions to DEQ. DEQ should submit all its regulatory requirements to the county. If there is a conflict, the parties should sit down and discuss. The issue, next one, the issue to what extent, if any, the county can impose additional or different requirements beyond what or in conflict with what DEQ said is a legal issue. And then refer to that section of the legal issue report.
DEQ has always sent notices of our decisions. If they were noticed of the application, then they receive notices of decisions. So
Great,
in
so
this
it's
case, they would definitely get that. As far as sitting down, if there are conflicts, once the board makes the decision, or the planning commission in this case, to approve the conditions of approval, you can't change those unless you go back through the conditional use permit approval process.
Right.
So there wouldn't be any way to change any conflicts after the approval.
Well, there would be a way. You just said it. You would have to consult, collaborate, and decide, and then arguably the board would have to reconvene and do this. But you know, if all three parties agree to do something, it can be done. You just have to jump through the hoops.
And the intent here was to just get the parties to recognize that those situations can occur and have some agreement that they're going to talk with each other when they do occur, and identify them as they're occurring.
Well, then if that's the intent, then I think it reads like this. The first sentence as it is, clarifying the intersecting, clarify the intersecting roles. Where there is an apparent conflict, the applicant, the county, and DEQ should collaborate in an effort, you know, to reconcile the differences.
Well, but where there is an apparent conflict are, it was really more work together to avoid conflicts. I keep coming back to this reclamation thing. DEQ has information that is in conflict with what the county required on 2 different occasions, but it's never floated up to the county. It keeps coming back as, well, we're not ready to discuss it yet.
Who is
I don't know.
saying we're not ready to discuss it yet?
In the when we go through the 150 pages, when the issue of reclamation came up, both the county and Republic said it wasn't ripe because it's not ready to be closed. So you ignore that issue of reclamation until it's, quote, ready to be closed. What happens is 2 things. One is DEQ approves designs that are going to make it impossible to do the reclamation that the county publicly committed to. Let's see, I lost the second part of that. The second part of it is you end up having a track record of, I don't know how many closure financial assurances have been done, but it's probably at least 25 years of them that don't have any mention of a closure plan. So if I were Republic, I would say, well, that's never been discussed. We don't have any way to include that in our plan, and we don't have any money for it.
No.
You can't come at the end of when the pile is built and say, oh, by the way, the intended use is a park and you have to do something for it.
Right.
Kind of see where I'm getting at?
I am. I'm just trying to define the solution. I don't think we should get into the assurance piece yet. Let's resolve this piece. I understand the connection, but let's resolve this piece. I
Yeah,
will
agreed.
add that in a conversation I had with Audrey, under the scenario, and I actually gave the scenario because it came up at our last meeting. The DEQ slopes say X, and in order to do screening, the slopes have to be less. I said, what would you do in those circumstances? And she said, we would sit down with Republic and the county and see if we could negotiate something that would work for both. So depending on,
That's the right idea.
depending on the science of
Yep.
it, slopes are for slope stability have more importance depending on where you're putting the screening and how all of that looks. But there is the willingness to sit down and reconcile these. So if the goal here is simply to say, when CUP conditions are put in place that have the potential of being different than those that the DEQ controls, DEQ, the applicant, and the county should sit down and see what they can do to reconcile them in advance. Then
Perfect.
down the road, if comes time, because things are going to change over time, and that if there appears to be a emerging conflict, you sit down and do it again.
Yep. It's an ongoing process.
What'd you
And
say,
that's
Sam?
why that's why I invented the term adaptive management. That's copywritten. So,
I think it's already been copywritten.
oh, damn it. And I wouldn't say shall sit down, it should. These are recommendations, but should sit down and reconcile the conflicts to ensure they will be enforceable when the time comes.
County requirements will be enforceable when the time comes.
Yeah.
I'd be okay with that if you put after conflicts, comma, if possible. Because there may be some that are simply not possible to reconcile.
Well, right now, if possible, is potentially modifying the word sit down and and reconcile if possible. You'd put no, if it's only the conflicts, you wouldn't have a period after a comma after the word conflict. You would sit down and reconcile the conflicts if possible.
I'm not sure why you need that, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's sit down it's sit down and attempt to reconcile the conflicts. If they're not possible, then obviously you're not going to succeed in doing it. Don't accept that yet, Inga, please. We're not.
And what I'm looking at here is, this reads like it's okay for Republic and DEQ to come up with something that makes the county's requirements unenforceable.
Uh,
I don't see
Again,
that at
please?
all.
Okay,
So this is Catherine, just landing in this space. There is a response back from Audrey today that might actually have the phrase that would fit here, which is very clear about the DEQ's responsibilities and the county's responsibilities. So if you give me just a moment, I will go pull that up before we jump off.
yeah, I read it. I didn't see anything in there, so I appreciate you pointing it out.
Oh, so I actually felt, meaning I wasn't just suggesting that we read it. I actually found that there was something in there that
Yeah,
might,
just point that out.
Yeah.
I missed it.
yep, hang on just a sec here.
Mhm.
So here's one section. So it's in that email literally from Audrey. It's under LLUF number 16. DEQ relies on local governments to determine land use and to verify compliance with local land use requirements. That's language that might be helpful here, but there was another little section also. Meaning rather than us debating what should or should not be implied by that statement, we're just pointing to the fact that there needs to be a clarification of whose roles are what. Hang on, it's a long one. Okay, how about you move on to the next one and I will keep looking. And when I
Mhm.
find it, because this is really long, we can come back to that. But I'm a little hesitant on that last section of that as well. It implies or suggests things that maybe we're not trying to say with that first sentence.
Maybe we should just go on, or do you want an explanation of what perception I'm worried about?
And if you're asking me, I don't need one. If
Okay,
you're asking others, then yes.
others,
Yeah, I don't see what you're talking about as far as
mhm,
what your statement said.
yeah, what I'm trying to, get at is, the community perception that, commitments were made to return the land to a certain use. But the DEQ requirements in now Republic actions are going to preclude those community expectations from ever being materialized, ever being realized. And the only way I can see around that in the future is to have all folks talking to each other, the three parties talking with each other in sufficient detail so that the DEQ approved designs don't negate the ability to meet the county's land use requirements.
But how does this language in this sentence negate that?
I think it's the if possible is a problem here.
Well,
I
it's
think
always if possible. I mean,
well, then you just let it go. I'm gonna jump out of not being on the committee. I'm gonna be a person in the public, and I'm reading this. I'm saying, okay, they recognize that they have things that could be in conflict, and they're going to sit down and reconcile the conflicts. But didn't we have a public meeting and a process that said these are the requirements? Why aren't they being enforced?
So I'll toss this out and see if this is helpful at all to the points that are kind of wandering around on this particular one. So in Audrey's, right, it's still that F number 16. DEQ relies on local governments to determine land use and to verify compliance with local land use requirements. To me, that kind of answers that question, and it cites an OAR in that particular case.
Okay.
And another piece of, well, the other piece is the next section that talks about land use compatibility at the landfill is contingent on the continued compliance with all other county codes and agreements. So that kind of leans into that DEQ space. It's probably dancing a little around the edge still. If we are able to cite an OAR in this case, where I don't see where county code could be in conflict with DEQ, as I am seeing what we have reviewed, it would have to be in compliance with DEQ and may add additional requirements, conditions of approval, or requirements of compliance. And there's an OAR specifically in her email that would support that. So it almost, I'm not being led to that conclusion by that piece in red. Because
No.
I don't know, I can't cite an example where we have DEQ is in conflict with Benton County Code. And maybe that's how we should look at this, is can we actually cite an example? And if not, then maybe we just need to identify that DEQ literally relies on local government to determine land use and to verify compliance. And that land use compatibility at the landfill is contingent on that compliance. It is in that email from her.
Yeah, the example we're trying to work is the reclamation issue.
Right. And that would be an over and above what DEQ doesn't require that, but the county has had language that has been part of the conditions of approval going way back to the beginning.
I'm still struggling to get some words in here.
Ed,
Yep.
go ahead.
No, I don't have any words. I'm thinking you just get rid of all the red. You just go back to the just to go to the black and maybe cite the DEQ requirements. I guess that just puts more of a burden on the county to understand what DEQ is doing and making sure that what they're doing is consistent with the county's requirements. I'm not sure Darren wants to hear that, but
You know, the problem is that there are certain areas where DEQ's regulations preempt the field. And that means the county can't have additional regulations. And there are certain instances where the county's conditions may in fact conflict with DEQ's closure requirements now, or as they may be changed in the future. So, for example, on a reclamation, I mean, on a closed site, there are certain places where you can't plant any trees because it might punch through the protections.
understand.
Yeah, and you can't grade a landfill at all once it's been closed. So those two things, just from 1983, could conflict. And as over the years, the regulations on closure have gotten more and more complicated and tighter,
And
and they're likely to continue to do so. So I don't want to imply, I see where you're trying to get, Ed, but I don't want to imply that all of the conditions the county imposes are going to be complied with in DEQ's reclamation plan, when in fact they might violate some of the DEQ requirements for those plans. And that's certainly sitting down, talking about it and trying to resolve the conflicts are good, but I don't want to suggest, and that's the reason, if possible, that somehow DEQ is going to have to comply with the county's requirements in developing their plan, because they may not be able to.
Yeah,
that's in their bailiwick. That's not in the county's bailiwick.
Yeah, but Jeff, we've gone around this since like December, and there's words to the effect on super reclamation and all those requirements being superseded by DEQ requirements. And I'm glad you recognize that those things can change, but it still means people have to sit down and talk through what the changes mean and how to present those changes to the community. The goal is to prevent irate citizens. And we just need some help in making sure that happens. I don't think that adds anything, Inga, what you put in.
Could we add a sentence there that says identify as soon as possible any areas of potential conflict, and have the applicant, DEQ, and the county sit down and resolve them, reconcile them.
Or
we said
change it
that already.
to identify areas of existing conflicts and have the three parties sit down and resolve them.
I say existing and future potential conflicts, because we already have one right here.
Yep. That helps, because it tells folks that are upset about the condition of the landfill that people recognize that there are disconnects with what was previously agreed to, and they're working to resolve it. That's the way I interpret that.
So are we good to go with that additional sentence?
No, because we've already, it's not said when, it's already happened. Existing conflicts.
Mark has his hand up also.
Yeah.
Right. Let's get this. So Inga, the second sentence, when conditions are going to be put in that may conflict or are currently in place, we have to add the reality that's not just for the future, it's now. There you go. Ed, does that solve that narrow problem, at least as far as we're going in the moment?
I think so,
I-
but Mark
I-
has got comments.
We're gonna get Mark, then Jeff.
Yeah, I just want to point out that what ends up, what concerns me about the way this language is written now is that you go through a whole public process, conditions of approval are issued, and that whole public process involves the public. And then later, somebody comes up and says, oh yeah, well, the county and the applicant and DEQ are going to get together and the public is not involved in that at all. And so this process that's been laid out here excludes the public from being involved once the deal's done. And then that's where the conflict will come in. If some other deal, the county says, oh, we don't really care, it doesn't matter, we'll just let them do what they want to do. And then that's when we have what we have now.
Right.
So there needs to be something in here to recognize that it's not just the county, DEQ, and the applicant getting together in a back room to come up with a plan that is different than what was published in the conditions of approval.
So this language right here states that, but if you would like to reword that to be clearer, please make that suggestion.
Which language restates it?
When CUP conditions are going to be put into place.
Yeah,
So that
and
implies that it's not already adopted.
yeah, well, the challenge, of course, is that when this was first being crafted in our 45 minutes or hour that we've been working on this one recommendation, I don't know exactly how anyone is going to determine in advance that a condition of approval may conflict with DEQ requirements. So that's problematic as well, but I don't really have a lot more energy to work on this recommendation. I'm sorry.
You're muted, Sam.
You can easily add that DEQ, the county, the public and the applicants should sit down. So it's at least that encouragement to sit down as part of the reconciliation process.
Who in the public, Sam? That would be I don't know that that would be workable at all to
We have a
involve the
public
public.
meeting. You have a public meeting or a notice that it's going to be discussed.
Darren,
So I'm just curious because this too, I'm not sure what we're trying to craft here. It's the responsibility of the county and whichever either department, recommendations from staff, planning commission, whatever those layers are, to come up with if we were looking at an application, to come up with conditions that would comply with, would not conflict with DEQ first and foremost. But why ever would we recommend conditions of approval that would pose a challenge or would I just feel like we're preemptively doing something we wouldn't be doing anyhow in this language. I think it is, I'm not sure where we're headed on this one. And I too, like Mark, I feel like we've been over and over and over this one. We're just looking at making sure that it's a public process, which would be a public hearing process. I'm not presuming in any space that we have conflicts because we don't know that. And there's multiple layers why we don't know that. If past conditions don't any longer apply because of a memorandum of understanding or, whichever direction we go moving forward, does not automatically mean we have conflicts with a reclamation plan or with a closure plan that isn't even before us. These are all hypotheticals that we're trying to navigate. It doesn't seem like it's necessary. I just like the simple statement, clarify the responsibility or the authorities of the respective roles of DEQ and the county, ... Grab the space that we make sure that we've got public involvement is to be assured through this process. Or, I would assume we don't need to recommend that the parties are at the table. They should be. It should be a public process. It seems like we're adding a bunch of language where maybe we don't need it.
Yep.
So I've
Well,
heard three major objectives in the last whatever it's been. One is that the county and DEQ are sitting down early and coordinating, which I think is good practice. Then I've heard that there should not be any active conflict between the county's conditions of approval and DEQ regulations. And then I've heard that there should be as much coordination as possible between the county's conditions and DEQ regulations. And I think, so unless I'm hearing things differently, I'm hearing three very different objectives, all of which are, you know, noble, but they're very different from each other.
And different from the recommendation, that's recommendation 10. So they're all separate, 4 separate recommendations.
So, and I don't offer that to confuse this because I know we've been around the corner a number of times.
Mhm.
Can we capture, sorry, Darren, I thought you were done.
Yeah, I just want to state what I've been hearing, I think are very different kind of objectives. And I'm a little bit hesitant to weigh in because I'm not sure what all or how ambitious we're trying to get. At the tail end of that last part of the conversation, I heard a public hearing in advance of the public hearing, which I don't, you know, maybe that's just semantics, but I think we have to be really careful about how we describe the process and what we can and probably can or maybe shouldn't try to accomplish through multiple public hearings.
So could you end up with just saying, keep the black words and then clarify the intersecting, blah, 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 and establish a process for resolving conflicts? Or do you even need that?
Well, you know, I think, and again, to go to Catherine's point, there are likely, when we get to the CUP process, going to be conditions where we have arguments over whether DEQ's regulation preempts the field, and that will all be part of the public hearings process. So it will be discussed at that time. Sorry. And be part of a public process for dealing with it. So there actually is a public process where that will be argued, and the county will ultimately have to make its decision. And there may be parts of that decision that could get changed by subsequent rulemaking or legislation. But there's already a process, and I can't remember where it is, that's been recommended or is in place, where if something that DEQ does affects the ability to comply with the condition, then the planning director can require a public review. So there's already that process in place.
That would be good if you could identify that just for the record so people know where to look.
Yeah, and I can't remember whose recommendation that's in,
Mhm.
but I may be in the legal subcommittee's recommendation, because we talk about, there's the whole discussion of what does that section mean. And I think the clarification that we have landed on is that probably occurred before there was a coordination stage and coordination requirement, but now it would serve the purpose that if there's a change that would affect the ability to comply, that the county can, require a new review. So that, I think, is about the best you can do, because otherwise Catherine's absolutely right. We're trying to crystal ball potential future conflicts that may or may not ever arise. So I think I would, and to the extent that, well, I think that sort of solves the problem we're trying to get at.
And if we leave the words that are up there now, that's where we were about 3 weeks ago. So this is good.
Well, so the practical fix is it is in the legal subcommittee report somewhere.
Yep.
And the recommendation could be simply, adding, had some language that added to this. It said impacts may not be clear and should establish a reconciliation mechanism. And then you can add a sentence or add it onto that, and noting that there's this existing process and procedure for that purpose, and plug that in. So at least it gets the reader to the place where they can learn more about that.
So Darren, can I ask you a question specifically? That is the process that already exists through an application, a staff review, and a planning commission public hearing process, right? So I see your head shaking. I don't know if you're preparing to say something. I'm waiting.
Go ahead.
I'm curious if, we don't need to recreate the process that already exists, I don't think. So can we just nod to that process in this recommendation? And I really do want to point back to that OAR. DEQ relies on local government to determine land use and to verify compliance. So if we take that first section and say, understanding that DEQ relies on local governments to determine land use and to verify compliance with local land use, I think it says law, and it cites an OAR, we're literally taking DEQ's language, we're pointing to that land use process. And I'm hesitant to create a whole bunch of language that doesn't point me to that land use process.
Yeah, the issue though is whether it's a land use regulation or it's an environmental regulation subject to DEQ's jurisdiction. So yes, for land use, totally agree with that, but there could be conditions that stray into DEQ's jurisdiction that may conflict. So that's just the facts, and there's so I'm fine with putting a period. I'm fine with it as it is currently drafted.
Yeah, if it's OAR 340, so I don't think that's land use.
Well, it's definitely a DEQ regulation, but all they're saying is that they rely on the local government to establish land use compatibility and land use regulations, which they do.
Yeah.
But that doesn't. There's also a statute that says the local government can't impose any rules, regulations, or orders that conflict with DEQ's regulations. So there is that tension out there, and I think it is difficult for us to try to crystal ball when those conflicts are going to arise and in what context, but they will arise. So I'm willing to say yes, we'll have a reconciliation process, but at some point, the DEQ's regulations may supersede the county's requirement, and there may not be a possible reconciliation. And so people, I don't want to imply that, oh yes, we'll get together and we'll solve that problem. We'll get together and try to solve that problem.
Okay, we need to move on. We have 5 other very heavily edited recommendations to go through. I'm going to accept the changes for 11. And Jeff, you made the change here.
Right.
And 12.
There's one above it in 12.
Right, that's the one. Yeah, I changed public burden to potential impact because I don't think that I think that public burden assumes evidence that or information that's not in evidence. Potential impact, I'm willing to live with.
And I'm good with taking away anything that implies something. So public burden does imply something, but potential impact, I think, is misleading. There is an impact currently. It's not potential, it's current. So current and future impacts, but potential suggests there isn't one recognized presently. And certainly the city of Corvallis is evaluating that very thing right now. So that too is.
I'm okay with what you're proposing, Catherine.
Well, I'd be fine with just saying, consider the impact.
Just impact.
Yeah.
Whoops. Okay, on to 13.
Same
Yeah,
language
the
change.
only change, I made the same change to this one about public burden, potential impact, and I'd be fine with saying impact. And otherwise, I was fine with Ed's language, which is the blue language, except that I'm trying to figure out whether the accuracy of that section. Unfortunately, I'm at my dad's, and so my multiple books of all the past decisions are not in front of me. So I just was reserving my right to comment on that to determine if that's really what that says.
Do you want me to send you the rod? You know, that it's been published in a bunch of these things.
Yeah, I just need to confirm that. And if it's true, I'll be comfortable with it. If I can confirm it, I'll be comfortable with it. And I haven't been able to go back to your Appendix 150A pound yet.
No, you won't. That's the big thick document. Let me just send you the rod again.
If you could do that, that'd be great.
I'm actually, for this one, I would actually take out impact altogether and just say evaluate whether acquiring buffer land is consistent with 2040 vision. Well, plus the additional language there.
I'm fine with that.
I'm okay. Catherine, you're quiet.
I didn't think I was being quiet. Maybe on that one.
This is the one we're still.
Yeah, Ed's gonna send me the docs and I will review them and just to confirm it.
Okay. On to 14 then.
I was fine with that. I didn't suggest any comments.
$15.
I was fine with that. I didn't have any comments. $16, I took out recognizing there's a current odor problem with the landfill. I think that's a subject of debate. So, but I'm fine with the rest. I'm fine with the rest of the recommendation.
So I'm hesitant to remove that. I don't think that's a subject of debate. I think that there's enough reports that that's actually going on, although not an official report, because that process remains elusive for some folks. Perhaps there's a better way that we can language that. That maybe doesn't suggest as strongly, but I do think it's important that we acknowledge that we have heard about odor concerns in the testimonies in this work that we have done, certainly from community members in that region and folks that are driving through that region. So what's a better way to capture that here?
I would be willing to say to address public concerns about odor, because clearly there have been some.
And Ed and Mark.
That's fine.
and you didn't have any.
No, I was fine with the language, although I just noted that Inga has said that the county's already doing this, although it's not a code requirement. So if you want it in the code, then that would be
Mhm. Okay.
So let's just not blow over the issue. Are you making a code amendment recommendation here or not?
well, that's what the recommendation is. Is to make a
Okay.
code amendment and
Okay.
use application documents. But the county is, as Inga has reported, doing that right now.
Great.
Doing that for a while.
Okay. I'm fine. Thanks.
Okay. Now we go back.
So this is one we talked about previously, and I think Mark was going to go back and look to see where he found where it was still limited to some counties, but in fact, the 1983 decision did repeal the comprehensive plan provisions that limited the area where stuff could come from. And it's almost, since it's now clear you can't do that constitutionally, this is more of a historical argument than an actual issue, but that's how I read it.
And I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to go find where it was that it listed 5 counties. When it first started in 74, there were 3 counties, and then later there was another decision that talked about 5 counties. But I haven't had the opportunity to go back and find that yet. And I don't know if Ed, if you remember, I know that we've talked about that before, but I don't know which land use decision that was part of.
Yeah, and I actually got some, that was one of the DEQ updates. I found a reference to the time, I think it was 83, that it went to a regional designation and identified the counties as only the 4 counties. I believe it was Benton, Marion, Lincoln, Lynn, Tillamook. So there's still a disconnect there.
So is there a way realistically with the time that we have left, I'd like to see that this remain for its historical context in the findings. It is not a recommendation, it's just findings. We're not making actions necessarily on it, but this conversation continues to poke at the bear, if you will. And it's not just in our subcommittee. So if we can address it as a finding, identify where those changes happened, acknowledge what Jeff is saying in this space, I think it's just going to put that to rest, and it will be historically captured in this document then moving forward.
Yeah, I think it needs to stay simply because it points at the system flaw. And I'll provide the, if I stay up to 1 a.m. again, I'll get the notes out on the DEQ review to date. And I need to thank you all, Darren and Sam, in advance. I found that we'll probably be able to get some useful information out of the DEQ file review that will help this process and also help with calming down the community.
Great. That's starting to go on that, what you have there's a language problem. Its second line says, top review prior to the legal before the Supreme Court 1990 X ruling. You just say prior to the Supreme Court's 1990, whatever it is, X ruling.
I think it's 1998.
All right.
That's my recollection.
Sorry, say that again. What do I have to?
The words to the legal, it's not making sense. So sending waste prior to the Supreme Court's ruling.
All right.
And this one would not necessarily need a corresponding recommendation. I don't think that
Unless
every finding doesn't need a recommendation necessarily if this is a statement of fact.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, Inga, back up. I think right after according, you're missing two, the word TO right there, according to the staff report, maybe.
And this is where, Jeff, I think you were going to provide the staff report because we were arguing the
Yes,
83,
I
both
apologize.
sides.
I apologize for not doing that. Again, when I made that promise, I didn't realize I was going to be at my dad's and away from my historical documents. So I will do that when I get back tomorrow.
So is there a way then to note that finding 6, we still have a few loose ends to tie up there?
Are we simply looking for a citation here, or what? What is it that we're looking to add?
Well, I was going to send Ed, I told Ed I would send him a copy of the 1983 findings and decisions that had that information in it,
Specifically a staff report.
the staff report.
Okay.
Well, it's already in the documents you have, Ed.
I just couldn't find it.
Okay.
And it was just a convenience item. It wasn't questioning that it doesn't exist. I recall it. It was just I couldn't put my hands on it quickly, and we were trying to help each other out.
Okay. Why did you make the change here, Jeff?
Are we on 13 here?
Yes.
Oh, I thought that this was, this said county had issued land use conditions of approval before the applicant was granted necessary operating permits from multiple state agencies. So I thought the issue was here. I thought the issue here was that we had not required, that you had not required as part of the conditions of approval, the applicant to submit all the required state permits that it was supposed to be getting. And so you authorized construction because you can't issue conditions of approval with conditions to get or recommended recommendations to get state permits before the applicant gets the state permits.
I don't think that's what we found in the record. I thought we found conditions of approval that said, go get the permit.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah,
They had that those advisory conditions about that you need to get a permit from Division of State Lands.
no, they weren't the advisory ones. They were, you must. So I'm uncomfortable with changing this because I don't think that's true. I don't think the changes reflect what's in the record. And the point was a condition of approval says get a DEQ
Oh, okay.
permit, and nobody
Okay.
ever checks.
Well, except that they do check on the DEQ permits, which are the major permits that we have to get. And of course, it says except for that. All right, I'm willing to go back to the original language. I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference. My comment on E14 is the same as above, that that the 1983 decision is the decision that actually repealed those limits.
And I think we have two purposes here. One is to convey to the public, they're not crazy, that it was limited at one point in time. And two, things change. There was a 1998 decision that says, that supersedes it. So I don't see how we have to change anything on F14. And
Do we know how many counties the landfill serves currently?
I could ask.
I believe
25,
it,
23?
Daniel, do you know
I think
how
it's
many counties
23.
the landfill serves?
I can look at the annual report.
Daniel, I think Daniel's gonna check. So are we good with 14, or Jeff, did you wanna?
Well, let me reread again. I guess, expanding upon this limited geographic area was to require re-review by the Planning Commission, but the Planning Commission did re-review it in 1983 and recommended the board that they repeal those limitations, and they did. So it's nothing in this finding is incorrect, except for the date of the Supreme Court decision, but it's also not telling the full story.
I don't think we found the Planning Commission re-review.
Well, the Planning Commission did make a review. It's just that the Benton County Board of Commissioners was the final decision in that case, because they were all, they considered the site plan review, and they considered the new zoning and comprehensive plan provisions, and those latter required code amendments, and only the Board of Commissioners can approve code amendments.
So it's more like the Planning Commission review was not needed because the county board reviewed it.
Well, I think the Planning Commission did review it and make a recommendation.
I don't remember seeing that, that's all. I do recall the board actions, but I don't recall it ever going to a Planning Commission. So if you said something that was require review by the Planning Commission, in lieu of this review, the Board of Commissioners' decision.
So just to clarify, I think we've been bouncing around back and forth about 25 counties. So is that 39 counties correct?
That came direct from Daniel right now.
And I can't hear anybody.
You can't hear anybody?
Oh, now I can hear y'all. That's why you're all quiet.
Yeah, well, I have no reason to dispute that, although I don't know it for a fact. But if Daniel's the one who's been working on that committee, so he should know.
All right, and that then implies that we are outside of the state of Oregon. Is that into Washington, Idaho, California? Do we know which direction? Probably Washington.
I know Washington. I don't know about California or Idaho.
I think it's south. Well, again, I'm not going to stick my head out. I think I know about Southwest Washington, but I don't know what the extent is.
And I'll just thank you for that. And whatever y'all said for the last 3 or 4 minutes when I wasn't listening, that I didn't know I was missing it. I am curious about this also was in the email from Audrey about the requirements of recycling programs, etc. It was kind of broad. and whether or not that's a space that we have looked at as a subcommittee. I know we've talked about the fact that Benton County, leans into that space, but we're only about 10% of the waste that is going into the landfill. So is there a finding, or is there a place that we need to acknowledge that what Audrey just provided about that recycling kind of, it's not a regulation necessarily, but there's some language in there.
Yeah, because I didn't realize there were so much. I didn't realize there were any counties outside of Oregon that were
Oh, yeah.
collecting materials.
Yeah.
I think that has to get revised to 39 counties, including 5 outside of the state of Oregon, because those recycling requirements, certifications that Audrey pointed out, I'm not sure how those are acquired for the counties outside of Oregon.
So I think this information about the counties is coming from Daniel's subcommittee, so that information is already included in all of his information. You don't need to restate it here.
Well,
It would come from the
it's trying
capacity
to-
subcommittee.
yeah, I know, but it's trying to make it easy for the reader, the person, John Q. Public, and not realizing it's 34 counties in Oregon, right?
36.
36, so 3 counties outside. So
Yeah, but I don't
Like-
think, I don't think we take waste from all 36 counties in Oregon.
I think it's more likely that we take it from Southwest Washington and don't take it from Lake County and Malheur County.
Right.
yeah,
All
Or
those people are
Deschutes
going
County.
north. Yeah, right. Deschutes has its own.
I think
So-
you have to flag how many are outside the state. Because that's the kind of thing that just agitates people. And if you're not being upfront with it, you're just disguising it. Well, it's in another part of the report. It just invites unnecessary criticism.
I agree with Ed. It's a sentence or two that we can add here that would just wrap it up in this finding. And if there's any recycling statements or references we need to capture here as well. That's new coming to us now.
So Inga, can you ask Daniel, can we say serves 39 counties in 3 states? Or, have him help us with which states we're receiving waste from?
Sure.
Thank you.
Are we okay with 14 then, if I get that extra information?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Mark and Ed, do we want to look at that recycling component of
States, I
this?
need-
Or
I
get
think
that
we've got to
tomorrow.
go through everything that Audrey put together and see what changes here.
where it fits?
Well, I don't know this for a fact, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but if it's like a lot of other regulations, if they're going to send waste to Oregon, they have to comply with Oregon's requirements. And certainly Coffin Butte has to comply with Oregon's requirements.
Well, and that's an important statement to make if that's just that simple as well. Like if that's the
Yeah.
case, then we can resolve a lot of questions for the public as well, just by making that statement. So
Is that something, is that a finding we make with our land use though? I mean, is that, or that's something that just came new to you from an email that is directed at the legal land use committee? It's not a finding for our committee. That's what I'm saying. Is it or is it not? I don't think it is.
I'm okay letting it go as long as it gets in there. Has this has,
So because, oh, sorry, Ed.
no, you go first.
I was just gonna say, so our conditions of approval, historically, we have had, there is narratives in those conditions about recycling. And the types of materials and how it's handled and future leaning into those I'm paraphrasing it very loosely. I just remember that that is there. I do not think that that is specifically a legal land use subcommittee discussion. I do think it falls in our purview to that extent that if we went full on with potentially 39 counties in 1983, which, you know, you might be able to interpret from what our findings are at this time, and we didn't have those requirements for recycling, I do think it's something that we should explore. I'm just gonna, we don't need to debate it here, but I don't, if the legal subcommittee wants to look at that as well, I don't object to that, but I don't think that it is outside of our charge.
Well, today is your last day to do this because these findings and recommendations are finalized as of today. Just so you know, except for the little bits that we put in here that I have to add in,
Well, then I
links
don't,
and whatnot.
it's not likely then the legal subcommittee will be looking at it either, so.
And the recycling stuff is not a law, right? No one, I'm not forced to recycle. And I don't, that the whole what level of recycling is happening in other counties that are contributing to waste to the landfill. There's no regulation there. We can't force people to recycle.
no,
don't-
you're requiring counties to have a recycling plan.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they all do, but the level to which people recycle and
That wasn't an issue.
yeah, okay.
All right, well, we
Um,
have 15. We need to, Jeff made a comment in 15. And made a change in 17 and another comment in 18. So we need to get through those.
Yep.
And it's already after 5. So
The 1 to 15 is really a change. It's just a note that Jenny now has opined that she doesn't believe that the applicant submittals associated with the 83 decision are enforceable. And I was tasked with drafting a memo that explained my reasons for doing that. And I didn't do it because Jenny's done it for me. So I agree with her analysis. And so I'm just noting that there.
Yeah, and I don't think we agree yet, that's all.
Right. No, so I'm fine with the language because we don't have consensus.
okay.
And
So
I
you
still owe
want,
you the stuff from Mark.
well, yeah, that's kind of a mood unless you're going to get it to me tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah.
I guess I can just link this to Ginny's memo then. Yes.
What do we
Mark's
looking?
memo and Ginny's memo. The information on PC 8307. So your memo,
My memo exists, yeah.
and then the one that Ginny put together for the legal subcommittee.
Yeah, and I think make sure that when you link to my memo, because it included 5 or so attachments, and those are critical to the analysis. It can't just be the memo.
Well, it's whatever you sent to me with the memo. Yeah, that'll all
Okay.
be included.
Yeah. All right, great.
So you've been able to find them, Inga?
I have his email from, all the emails.
Okay.
And
Then
I think
don't
it's
have to do
online.
anything.
Actually, currently it's on our website. I believe I put it on there.
Yeah, it should be.
All right, 17. So you deleted a large part of it, Jeff. Are you for or against?
Who are you asking?
everyone. Jeff deleted it, so I guess Ed, Catherine, or Mark, what are your arguments to keep it?
Well, when Jeff says we have no idea that this is correct, I would respond by saying, I believe it's 100% correct because Ed wrote it and he knows this stuff. And so I'm not in favor of deleting it. And Ed needs to speak up in himself, I think, that because it was.
Because this is, we talked about it, Jeff, of this was the document, the rod that you wanted me to send you later today.
Okay, well, let me take a look at that, and so I'll reserve my comment on that. But I do think the last sentence is a recommendation, not a finding.
I would agree with that.
Mhm.
Everyone okay with that? It's a recommendation.
Yeah, except we would disagree with that recommendation. So I don't know how you would deal with that because the purpose of the financial assurance is to ensure there's money to pay for reclamation, not compliance with the county's land use requirements. So that's I think that's
And that's probably the concept we need to get out, that there's money, but it's not to meet the county's needs
Or the public's expectations.
or the public's expectations. That's exactly the point that needs to come out.
So Inga,
Peter.
can you, what's the recommendation that goes with this presently? And how might that last sentence work with that recommendation? Or does it need to be its own recommendation, perhaps a little?
Okay, so 17, so it's something.
I think it's the one that we worked on for the first hour and a half of this meeting,
Exactly.
12.
hour and 15 minutes.
just seemed like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's one specifically.
So I don't see that number 10 is going to merge well with that last sentence that we just cut out of finding number 17.
This might be 8. We'd go with 8.
Yeah.
And so how would you reword that, Ed, to get to what you're actually trying to express?
Would it be possible, Ed, to evaluate that the count, would the recommendation be an evaluation of the DEQ required plan and financial assurance from Republic to ensure that it addresses county specific land use requirements?
That works.
Does that get us in at least the right lane?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I don't think we can agree to that because I don't think that the purpose of those funds are to do that.
Well, let's see if we can get something closer to what you can agree with. If we took that out completely, you'd be okay.
The red sentence, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
You
kind of
do-
a lesser, it's kind of a lesser included of the other comments. So I think you could take the red out and I'd be fine with that.
Okay, if we did that, and DEQ's Republic System requires with the worst, because the worst case closure and post-closure care plan has the cost and financial assurance in it. That's what it does.
But Ed, you had made the comment that, if I heard it correctly, the concern was that that's the DEQ requirement, but doesn't necessarily meet maybe the county's or the public's expectation in the county. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct. It doesn't, and that gets at, but when you review when you explain to the public what the county wants and what DEQ and Republic have agreed to, I think you'll end up with the firestorm that opens that whole box anyway. So it's just a question of let's see, an evaluation. We'll probably just go down a rabbit hole if we take out the red lines, then I think we can close this, and it'll fall out in public discussion later.
Ed, is the goal to understand how much of the county's conditions would be addressed by the reclamation funds, or what's the purpose there?
There's two things. One is that the county's goals are not reflected in the reclamation requirements in the plan, and there's no money to meet the county's requirements. And I'll jump ahead. In reviewing the DEQ documents, I found some from 1995 where Valley Landfills declared a portion of the site as closed and actually withdrew money from the financial assurance instrument with DEQ approval.
Jeff, are you comfortable acknowledging that? I mean, that seems like a fairly straightforward statement that there is not funding in the reclamation plan to implement conditions of approval in a land use CUP.
Yep, I'm fine with that.
Does that satisfy Mark and Catherine and Ed if we just make that statement?
Yeah, it starts getting it out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good with that. If Ed's good with that language, I think that leaves the doorway there for us to enter at a later time.
Mhm.
What, say that again, Darren?
Well, I think what I'm hearing is a desire, and I see Mark wants to jump in. I think what I'm hearing is just an interest in stating that the reclamation plan and funding don't require Republic Services or the landfill operator to address county land use requirements, including conditions of approval.
I wouldn't put it up there, Inga. I think that's the wrong place. Where we were working is where it goes.
Well, it's a finding. It's not a recommendation.
Okay, then it needs to be a separate one, because that has to do with RCRA.
Mark, in my
Actually, it says it again there. So I'm okay. Never mind. I'm sorry, Mark.
No, I'm just listening. I was getting ready to speak because I didn't want to be one of those people that starts speaking and then doesn't have his microphone on, but I was waiting to see what the language was that was going to come out of this process before I really said anything. So I'm at the starting line. The gun has not gone off yet, so I haven't begun running down the track.
Mark, I asked the
Something like
question a
that.
minute ago, whether or not the way I'd inarticulately described that was what you all were trying to get at.
Yeah, I think what we would, I think technically what we're trying to say here is somewhat more directly that the DEQ closure and post-closure plans and financial assurances do not include any funding for reclamation requirements that are imposed by the county through the conditions of approval. I think it needs to be, because people don't understand, a reclamation plan is, you know, I think what we've been talking about visually is a reclamation plan, whether they're screening and grass on the field and all those sorts of things. But what we're trying to do is create a clear understanding that the DEQ closure and post-closure requirements do not help Valley landfills comply with, or do not require Valley landfills to comply with the county's reclamation requirements. Does that make sense?
I think so. And I think we're in agreement. I was just trying to kind of fact check that. Jeff, do you agree with what Mark just said?
Let me look at the sentence after it's been wordsmithed here.
Okay.
So reclamation comes out of that space, the post-closure.
Yeah, and actually reclamation is the wrong term.
That's correct.
It should be closure and post-closure.
Yeah, so DEQ's closure and post-closure requirements and funding. And it's the financial assurance. So there's a closure plan and a post-closure plan. They are reviewed and submitted, and the result of those plans is a cost estimate for how much it's going to cost to close and fund things in post-closure. And then the landfill operator is required to provide financial assurance to make sure those things are funded. And the point we're trying to make here is none of those requirements include anything having to do with what the county or the public might expect with regard to the visual aspects or the reclamation of the landfill site. I know that's wordy, but that's the point, and happy to have somebody wordsmith it for us.
I think you've almost got it. Can we add, so well, first I'd change don't to do not. It sounds funny and looks funny, but that's just my thought. Do not require Valley landfills to comply with county reclamation conditions of approval might be where I would lean there, but we could leave requirements, but or public expectations. I think we're talking both sides of that space, and I think public expectations are a big part of the reclamation plan. And I'd like to see that we nod to that space here in this finding.
I'm just rereading the language. And instead of, I might suggest just instead of funding, so we've got closure and post-closure requirements and financial assurances.
Yep. That's
Yeah,
better.
Do not require Valley landfills to comply with county reclamation requirements or public expectations.
I think that's correct, with one potential quibble, and that is if we can get DEQ to take into account the county's requirements as developing the plan, which of course I'm not sure we can, then they would be part of the plan, and the financial assurances would have to be sufficiently covered. So, but I think as it currently stands, this is.
I'm glad you said it that way, Jeff, because that's been the theme, you know, from a bunch of these conversations of getting the three entities to talk and have a common vision of what that place is going to look like. I know that's difficult to sell it with Republic, but you kind of hit it on the head there.
And I agree with this, where Ed's leaning, but also with what Jeff said, but I just want to be clear so that I understand once again, the county can require additional conditions for closure and post-closure over and above DEQ. Is that correct? Like
Well,
we,
yeah, that is open to debate.
so that debate can then happen somewhere else.
Yeah, and it's mentioned in other place. I think that
Right.
was an hour and a half discussion that we had, or maybe the 2.5 hour, but you missed a half hour of it, so.
Okay, so we still have this section up here, which,
Yeah, and I promise to look at Ed's stuff and let you know if I have any suggestions on that.
No.
And the last one is, I did finally get some better numbers from Republic about this. And it's not terrifically different from this, but this is from Ian McNabb, and he says that in the last 10 years, the leachate has ranged from 14.5 to 34 million gallons disposed, with an average of 25.2 million gallons over that period per year. And they run 7,000 gallon trucks 7 days per week. So on average, it works out to be about 10 trucks a day. And the range over the 10 years is about 6 to 13 trucks a day. So that's the official numbers from Republic. And I can email those to you, Inga, if you would prefer.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'd be interested in those numbers with our increased waste intake, the amount of volume that's come in the last 5 years rather than a 10-year. I think that 10-year probably skews that more inaccurately just because of the amount of waste that's now occurring. Would that not suggest then that, I guess I'd like to see that more on a 5-year scale and average rather than over 10 years, if that's possible.
I can ask you.
And I would just say that the 7,000 gallon tanker, I mean, I believe Ian, but that strikes me as an odd number. Those tankers are almost uniformly 6,000 gallon tankers.
Well, I'm just reporting.
I'm not trying to shoot the messenger, buddy. You're good. You're good.
Good. Sometimes it feels like it.
Sorry.
okay, so you'll get me some information.
Okay, I'll
on
ask
that.
Ian to update it for 5 years.
And I'll need that tomorrow. Thank you very much.
All right.
And just to check, Jeff, so on to Mark's comment also, so we're gonna get a for sure on the size of those trucks.
Yeah, I'll say, Mark, yeah, I'll ask you to double check that.
Great, thank you.
And I would suggest you include both the 5 and the 10-year numbers, because that's where you'll see, you could potentially see a change that could be informative.
Agreed.
So Sam, you're suggesting that we look at a 10-year average and a 5-year average and figure out the number of trucks based on that?
Well, no, I was suggesting, regardless of what you put here, if you're doing averages, there should be, they usually in my world come, year 1 is this, year 2 is that, year 3 is this, and then you plug in the 5-year rolling average is X, and then you go year 6 is this, 7 is that, and then over that 5-year period it's X. Total is Y, and you can see if there's been a jump or a disconnect that requires further discussion.
So you're conditioning folks that the number may go up as you proceed forward.
Yeah, well, it seems like given the intake,
Yep.
it must have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it will.
it definitely has gone up. And I think where Catherine's going is the more recent history is more reflective of what people can expect in the future. 2 ways. One is that it seems like we're normalizing on 1 million tons a year. And that number has really just been in the recent years. There's also some variability with regard to rainfall. So the more rainfall there is, there's more leachate as well. So I think we should keep it relatively simple. The 5-year average seems more comfortable to me, but like I said, it's got variability in terms of the amount of tonnage disposed of and also rainfall. So however people want to do it is fine with me. The most recent one, I think in 2021, the annual report said 32.3 million gallons.
And if people are fine with just 5 years, I am. I mean, I was just
Cite
trying
the
to show a
5-year average and cite the most recent. It's on the record. It's not a big deal. It gives people a current
So
perspective.
you want 5-year average in last year?
Yeah, in most recent. year.
2021, unless they have 2022. I haven't seen the 2022 number yet because the annual report hasn't been published yet.
Okay, I will ask.
Thank you.
So folks, I'm just gonna ask the question about how we're coming on ending our 5 PM meeting. That ends at 5 PM, excuse me. I'm curious if we are going to address at all the conclusion statement. I had some concerns about some of the language that was in that statement. And I don't see that we're going to get to that
Yeah,
at 5 PM. But do think that it would be appropriate for some review commentary. And I don't know what our options are for that.
So we still have 3 recommendations to go back to. Also, Ed wanted to update us on his visit to DEQ. So if you just want to send me revisions to the language, that would be fine, and I will incorporate as well as I can multiple
And when do
changes.
you need those revisions? Like, we're just looking for that.
I need it by tomorrow afternoon,
Yeah.
3 o'clock. So Sam
I'd like
can
to
use
give
it
you-
for his
I'd
executive
like to-
summary.
The DEQ ones, let's maybe defer that to some other time. I just need some guidance on how that's going to be handled. And I've got some language on that conclusion. I'm presuming you didn't do anything with the introduction. Could I just show the language that I have for the conclusion?
We need to complete this recommendations first.
Okay, when we get to that point.
Jeff, were you going to, I'm still confused on 17. Were you going to make some changes to this? Because if you were, then they need to be done here and now.
Well, I was going to look at what Ed has. But I would be fine. I'm not going to, I mean, Ed's done more detailed research on this than any 10 of us. So I'm fine with leaving that in with the deletion of that last sentence, which is we've already addressed in the findings.
Well, we made a finding, but I don't think we made a recommendation, did we?
Didn't we make a recommendation?
We added the recommendation to recommendation 8. It was a separate kind of statement under, I think it was recommendation 8.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Wait, so
Did you want to see something, Catherine?
I might have lost it. I thought that's where we landed
Okay.
it. I want somebody else to verify that because I didn't see it when you scrolled by. I
Yeah,
thought that's what we decided that was pretty much where we were at, and then we added that new recommendation.
We added a new finding.
we
It
had-
wasn't
We added a
recommendation.
finding, yeah,
That's right.
that's where I'm
That's right.
confused. I think
We
we
moved-
added a finding, but we didn't do a recommendation.
Yep. You're right. So we went to look at this recommendation, decided that it was actually a finding instead, the language that we were messing with. And that's what's missing is the recommendation from that finding. Is that correct?
I think so.
The finding XX.
Yes. So did I delete something I wasn't supposed to?
I don't think so. I think that's it right there, FXX. I
Yeah.
think that's good up there.
But then I think
So-
there needs to be a finding associated with that new, excuse me, a recommendation associated with that new finding.
So go back to recommendation 8 again. Does that capture, even though it's an additional finding, does recommendation 8 actually, does that get everything we want in that space? It doesn't seem like it
Because you want to get at the money.
so the county part is not in this recommendation necessarily. It's
Right.
You know, I think we're trying to get to what Jeff said a second ago, is if we want DEQ to include the county's reclamation requirements in the closure and post-closure, then, and they may or may not do that, but I think that's where we need to develop a recommendation to tie with that finding that they're currently not included.
you are suggesting a separate recommendation, right? To go
I
with
would
finding
think so. Yeah,
FX.
I don't think it goes in 8 here, because I think it's going to get lost in there. Let me
Right.
reread it again.
So it's an 8+ and it's recommending that the county work with DEQ to ensure the funding is available to meet county conditions of approval.
Yeah, no, again, I can't agree to that for the reasons I couldn't agree to it up in the finding.
Yeah, that could be a big number. I can understand that.
Well, and again, it's only going to be fundable from the assurance if it's part of DEQ's reclamation plan. And that gets into the question of how many of the county's conditions can be implemented into the reclamation plan. And that is something, that is unknowable at this point.
Well, and that begs the question of what does that condition of approval look like? And do we not call it a reclamation plan? Does the county actually call it? We just require this screening, or we require where it gets pulled away from DEQ's, the language of reclamation plan, and it's just an expectation and a condition of approval that the county proposes then, which it has done so in nearly the entire history of the record. Does it need to be just identified as something completely different? And maybe this recommendation just needs to be that, how does the county view, evaluate what a county reclamation plan versus a DEQ reclamation plan? That's not the language, but
Recommend determine how the county's conditions of approval are reflected in the closure and post-closure plans for the landfill.
I would identify that as DEQ's closure and post-closure.
It's actually the plan is Republic's. Republic makes the plan. DEQ confirms that it meets their minimum requirements.
So we talk about DEQ's minimum reclamation requirements, and now I hear what you're saying, Ed, and I appreciate that, but we need to make sure we clean it up so that that is consistent in our other language then. And I would say, to the extent that in recommendation 8, we talk about DEQ's minimum reclamation requirements, that we also nod to that in this recommendation XX.
Okay. I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to get words that are similar in both places so that people aren't confused that it's a different topic.
Oh, right, they're like first cousins,
Yeah.
respectfully.
If you took this RXX and put it up by that recommendation, maybe we can just look at the two of them and see how we can match the language. I'm just getting a bit tired, so I'm we could change the comply with the county's conditions of approval, where it says county reclamation requirements, county's conditions of approval, or public. In that, I think you would get the parallelism.
But we're talking about the county's conditions of approval. related to
Reclamation conditions of
reclamation,
approval.
Right?
Yeah.
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 So
You
it
can do
can't,
that.
it can't, okay, can't just be all the
There we
conditions of
go.
approval.
So then you just put
And then
in
this-
county's reclamation conditions of approval are reflected. And that gives you the parallelism.
Yep.
That work for you, Inga?
Mm-hmm.
What about Jeff?
So now, just to
still
be
reading.
clear, we have DEQ in the finding, DEQ closure and post-closure requirements. In the
Right.
recommendation, we have valley landfills. So do we, because there's oversight by DEQ. It's a plan that is presented by valley landfills. So do
It's
we,
Valley landfills.
Plan, it's
should be instead of
DEQ's requirements. You know, but it's DEQ requirements in Valley Landfill's plan.
yeah,
Whichever,
and
doesn't
I
matter.
do think we need to nod to DEQ in that space, in
Yep.
both
Yeah.
recommendation and the finding.
So I leave the finding as
So-
DEQ.
Should I take this out then? Where'd I add it in?
I think that's okay. DEQ's worst case.
So now it says DEQ's plan and it's not DEQ's plan, right?
No,
We talked,
it's
we just talked about
DEQ's
this.
requirements
Right.
for a worst case. You can leave the worst case, just between DEQ and worst, put in DEQ's requirements. For a worst case closure and post-closure care plan.
Okay, I think
And
that's
then
good.
for the recommendation should say are reflected in DEQ's requirements for valley landfills, worst case closure. There we go.
Good, Jeff?
I would say, again, because we're not sure that this can be done, I would say determine if the county's reclamation conditions can be reflected.
But
Well,
again,
I think you're
so
looking,
the conditions exist, right, in our land use. So
But
if
the
we,
issue is whether or not they can be incorporated into the DEQ, the plan we submit to DEQ, which then would trigger the amount of financial assurances. So
It's almost a separate issue. If it can't be, is the county going to enforce the conditions of approval. That's a
Of which I think they've
maelstrom.
existed since 83, right? That condition of approval has repeated throughout the history of the record. So if we're,
Actually, the first two were conditions 4 and 6 of 1974, and they re-emphasized with more
in
detail
83.
in 83. And some of those 83 ones detail with slopes, which we, I think, agreed in the subcommittee were probably superseded by DEQ requirements, but not the grazing and the other visual impacts. I'm sorry for muddying things there.
Good.
I'm good with that.
Yep.
Now, folks, I've got to sign off. I hear my dad trying to make his own dinner downstairs.
Oh,
and
no.
Very bad.
Oh,
So
rush.
thanks. Sorry.
All
Thank
right,
you for
good-
staying
good to
so
see you,
long.
Jeff. Yep, good to
Thank
see you,
you.
Jeff.
Bye.
Hey, everybody,
Yeah.
this is Darren. I'm just joining by phone for a few minutes, too. I've got about, 5 minutes. If there's anything I can help with or add to.
I think we have 2 left to go, but Ed, I'd like to know, you've got a proposal for those conclusions. I have family here, so this is
Yeah.
not something I want to spend any more time than necessary tonight on. Is that something that we can do? Like, I'd like to see what your recommendations are, but certainly I'm not comfortable with that conclusion statement, the way that it currently exists, so much so that I would not support it in its current draft.
Yeah,
How do
I'm,
we how do we
I'm the
remedy?
same place.
Okay.
And Inga's got the screen here. Are you, do you need us to do anything on this?
Well, he has deleted the one recommendation. I guess you're okay with these
We're not
these
do-
2 removals.
No, not the. The 80, yeah, R7. We want that to be super clear. That's an extremely important document.
Yeah. And I would say that Ginny has got a valid opinion here, but Ginny is also not an appeals court or an appeals body. With all respect, I do mean that way, and she's got a perspective on this. But I think this is an important element of the historical record, to be sure. And there's a lot of things built off of that. So if well, I would be uncomfortable just eliminating it. And we can, whichever body needs to deliberate whether it's validity exists or not, doesn't have to be us.
Yeah, I could agree with that, certainly.
And that one on 6, I'm okay with deleting.
And I think we're okay with this because
Fix that.
we've talked about reclamation quite a bit already.
Yep.
How about them?
Okay, so as far as so Sam required us to write conclusions. I was going to wait for you folks to give me your conclusions, but he wanted them Friday. He wants it for draft 5 so he can complete his executive summary. He says he's going to just summarize the introduction and the conclusions and as part of his executive for each of the sections as part of his executive summary. So, and that's going into draft 5, which is going out Wednesday. So,
So is that Sam's draft or is that staff? Where'd that draft come from?
the conclusion that was drafted.
Excuse me. Yes.
Yes, I drafted that, like I said in the email, quick and dirty on Friday.
Okay.
Because he said he needed something, which
Yeah,
I don't think he had time to do anything with it anyway. So you can delete it entirely and send me your own draft of a conclusion to place in the document tomorrow.
well, let's just take a 5-minute stab at it, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And could I just put up what I drafted this afternoon?
Yeah, let
Because
me
it's
make it raw.
basically replacing everything here. Because the conclusion, quite frankly, I felt badly that we've besieged, laid siege to the county here. Like, boy, you guys sound beat up. Just, so I wanted to try a different tone. Let me close out something here and screen share. I just started from a different tack and wanted to recognize we're not attacking things, we're looking at documents and trying to draw conclusions. So this is a little less language than what's in there. Take a minute to read it and see if you find anything objectionable. And obviously I didn't finish it.
I'm a little uncertain about, so Republic in theory has work processes. We have not looked closely at those necessarily. We have maybe looked at some of that, but not in, I guess I should say not in depth. I do not feel confident in stating that the county has work processes that ensure compliance. I think we have had some of that, but I think that this leans heavier into that space of ensuring compliance than I think we've been able to perform in the past.
Okay.
And again, for whatever the circumstances or reasons, isn't really the argument here as much as to say that this almost sounds like we've been doing a great job all along and compliance is super. And I don't think that's the case. I think we've discovered that there's just gaps and things that could be improved.
Okay, that would shorten it up a bit more.
Well, and I like the fact that you're acknowledging those work processes, but I wonder how to do that differently. So maybe making that first sentence or that second sentence, excuse me, just about Republic, and that the county, however we want to make the statement about the county with respect to that process, right?
Hey, this is Darren. I'm listening to the conversation. I'm not looking at the words on the screen because for some reason, I can't join Zoom except by phone. But listening to this, is it more clear? Is it acceptable to say something like Benton County's existing compliance processes have not yielded or have not compelled full compliance with past conditions of approval?
That works. So if we take the county out of sentence 2 and we start at Benton County's, right, work processes have not compelled compliance with whatever that last little bit you said was.
Yeah, prior conditions of approval. And I think, I'm just going to say out loud what I think we all agree on is that we do have some compliance processes in place, and also we have not been able to compel complete compliance using existing processes. Inga, are you comfortable with that?
Mm-hmm.
And Mark and Ed, is that clear enough to, is that honest enough and transparent enough to kind of state the facts?
I think so, and it does it in a, I think, unoffensive way.
Yeah, we're not trying to sugarcoat this, but I also think it's going to be important to, not try to throw people under the bus or,
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And the board is going to react to that kind of constructive observation, I think, more readily than maybe some of the more, there are some offensive ways you could put this up, and that might please the crowd, but I think the board is going to be more receptive to just clear, less emotional statements of where we have done well and where we have fallen short.
I'm still watching Inga type.
I'm typing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Oh,
Ed's
Ed
typing this
typing.
now.
Well, no wonder it's so chunky.
chunky typing.
All right, and I apologize for needing to step away. I trust you all to pull this together, put a bow on it. I need to step away for a family
Yeah.
obligation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll
very
get
much.
a rough thing going, and send it out to folks, but, documents spending 50 years were reviewed to assess
Thanks,
compliance with
Darren.
public agreed to. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you,
thank
Darren.
you all for your time and effort on this. I really sincerely appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, take care.
So in
it
that
is-
first sentence, Ed, we need to capture the phrasing conditions of approval, requirements replaced with conditions of approval, or requirements and conditions of approval. It just seems like starting with that phrase is important.
I'm not sure what the second sentence is trying to say. Recognize that Republic has
Oh.
20 years of experience. I'm
In operating under current conditions of approval? No, in operating. Because the question of compliance is still without consensus.
That's correct.
I mean, can we even say they have 20 years of experience in any way with compliance? Because again, we still, that conclusion has not fully been met. That's that space of where,
Well, they're under the impression that they are in
correct.
compliance.
That's
But
what I was trying to
and I agree,
acknowledge.
Inga, and I appreciate that. So that impression is there from their perspective. From our perspective, we can't come to that conclusion. And I would not want to lead with a statement of their compliance when we have not been able to conclude that when we're presenting this as a conclusion.
But they're part of the subcommittee.
Correct, but we haven't met consensus on compliance within the subcommittee. So
That's true.
I'm careful about how we use the word compliance with their 20 years of wherever we were going there. Just I would actually separate Republic's sentence from Benton County's entirely. I don't think they do well together as an and.
No, they
Statement,
weren't
though.
supposed to.
Oh, you cut out some other stuff there though, Ed. We just lost some other,
Well, you cut out the whole sentence about Republic, which.
there it is.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
I'm struggling with what we're trying to say here about Republic, their processes and compliance. I don't,
What
Just-
if we just don't acknowledge that here? We're talking about Benton County and
Well, I
That's
think
what
you
I
have
was.
to, I think you have to acknowledge Republic in some way because they are part of this committee. And I think Jeff has made it very clear that his presumption is that Republic is in compliance. So I would say
Are we
Republic
making-
Republic is presuming that they are within compliance with all of the conditions of approval.
So not it is presumed, then Republic has presumed their processes have functioned. Mark,
Yeah, I'm just reading the language.
Have functioned in compliance with adopted conditions of approval, I would say.
and I would say to seek compliance. I would not say in compliance. I would say to seek compliance.
Well,
I'm trying
he
to take
states very clearly that
Republic-
he thinks that they are in compliance. Yeah, I like that.
But at this point, there seems to, well, what do we say here about public members look at the
I'm just
fact
gonna
we-
say,
we-
yeah, you've got 3 members of this subcommittee who do not necessarily feel that we have met that or achieved that level of compliance. So how do you acknowledge that equally in this space? Because Benton County is then the third party of this discussion.
Yeah,
Well, I wouldn't change that sentence because you're stating Republic's views there, and that's what their view is. They are in compliance.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I think that's it. That represents their view properly. Then I don't know what we say in that same space with regard to our review of the records and our inability to confirm compliance with many of the conditions of approval. We've stated this somewhere else. What I would do if I were constructing this is I would go to the findings and try to pull out some of the key things and build them in here, but just doing
So
this
I-
on the fly is a little hard.
It is, and I do not have the luxury of this time for us to navigate, multiple paragraphs here. So Ed, is this something you'd be comfortable doing that? Or Mark, can you put some, I don't know who's my family's.
let me
from-
just shoot this out to you. I've got a commitment I'm about 20 minutes late for.
Right.
And
And can we take
what I
some
was
of,
trying to say that what I was trying to get at, Republic thinks they have a work process that has achieved compliance. The county thinks this statement. The public members looked for facts in county and DEQ records to confirm compliance. So we've got two thoughts on compliance and then what we did. And as illustrated in the chart, additional information is needed to gain consensus on the roughly 80% of land use requirements where consensus was not reached. The above findings reflect the best efforts. The recommendations reflect actions for the county to take to compel compliance with
So Ed, I'd be careful there too, because some of those recommendations aren't compliance specific. They're best practices moving forward. They're, so they're not just compliance of conditions of approval. I just, if we're gonna have that piece in there, we have to add the other spaces in there as well. I like where you're headed here, but what are those recommendations? It isn't just.
So Inga, what's your timeline on this? Yeah, I heard you say tomorrow afternoon.
Yes.
You're so much more lenient than Daniel. Daniel is like 8 a.m. tomorrow. So I just want to say that I have 2 documents that I've got to review for the capacity subcommittee, and Daniel wants those. Ed, if you could send this out,
Yep.
I would try to take a look at what Inga has written and what you have written, and then see if I can try to put something together. But I'll do that tomorrow. I don't think I'll have time to do that tonight with the other capacity subcommittee work I got to do.
Babble, I like that. Well, and Inga, I just want to thank you for putting together what you had. There were just a few things that so here too, you know, it's a matter of words sometimes. So if we can merge, Ed, what you've started here with Inga's document, and I think Mark, I'd express just a couple points.
If you could just send those to me, Catherine, just
Yeah.
send me your comments, and I'll try to incorporate everything into, you know, a couple paragraphs. Try to make it succinct, because we really want people not just to read the conclusion. We really want to direct them to, as Ed has done here, to the findings and recommendations.
Right.
That's where we shouldn't be restating it all here in the conclusion statement.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I was
Hey,
having
2
trouble with.
a.m. Mark, I'll give you.
Yeah, yeah, no, you will not. Well, you're welcome to call me, but I will not be answering my phone at that point.
I won't really be calling you either, just to be clear. for the-
Okay, all right, good. That's good. Yeah,
Okay,
All right.
it's going out shortly.
Great.
all right. Sounds
Anything
good.
Thank you all
else
so
before we
much
head
for
out?
putting up with the,
This is
Thanks.
probably our last subcommittee meeting. Just so
Gee,
Where's-
Mark,
let it soak in.
we're gonna have
Where's
to have therapy
champagne?
Where
session.
exactly? Where is the champagne?
There, that too. That champagne and therapy next week. Okay.
Oh,
Thanks, Inga.
therapy. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. See
Everybody.
you.
Good night.
Bye.
good night.